Computers, an essential tool in modern life, are used frequently in education. In most countries, education heavily relies on computers, as many helpful resources such as videos, images, and information are on the internet and are inaccessible through any other means. However, computers were not always a part of education. Education before the 1960s was mainly done through the mouth and paper, but computers slowly began to make their rise during the 1960s and blew up in the following decade. In the 1960s, during the Cold War, the US was fearful of being beaten by Russia in terms of technology as Russia launched the first space satellite in the world, Sputnik.
It's a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York.
Since only 1% of secondary schools used and taught technology in their lessons, the U.S. passed the Vocational Education Act in 1963, funding many technological aspects of schools. The purpose of this act was to help citizens of the U.S. become more qualified and educated so that the U.S. population overall would have many more skilled workers. With the funding from the Vocational Education Act, schools were able to purchase microcomputers and students started to learn advanced subjects such as programming and science. One of the first teachers to teach programming was Seymour Papert. He was a mathematician and professor that taught in the early 1980s.
Okay, well, a perfect starting point is this webcast of this discussion. And even without knowing that, I'd meant to start off by giving an example of how the existence of the internet and the web could contribute to the very essential task, as I see it, of raising the level of discussion about computers, children, and learning.
Computers used in these early times were all low-cost microcomputers. These included the Apple II, Acorn BBC, the Tandy TRS-80, and many, many more. All of these computers were used mainly for practice programs and educational drills. Simulations and material created by computers were especially valuable as they were good activities that were hard to access. Computers helped in almost every subject as they were excellent at storing large amounts of information, and the increased use of personal computers advanced the public knowledge of microprocessors. Since these computers were so useful to education, schools started to use computers more frequently. From 1963 to 1970, the use of computers increased by over 50 times in this period. However, schools were still skeptical about using them regularly in classrooms, as computers were still facing many problems. The biggest problem computers faced was that they did not have good software programs installed, making them quite useless in certain subjects, as they were limited in what they could do. This was mainly due to the fact that there was no standardized regulation of systems and software inside the computer, and each different computer had a separate recommended list of downloadable programs and systems. Seeing this, the government for many states immediately took action in 1980 and started to increase funding for not only the hardware, but also the development of software inside programs and computers. The most prominent example of this was in Victoria, Texas, where the State Computer Education Center developed important educational software for schools, and many other states in the US started to follow behind. After computers had advanced educational software programs, they had a multitude of uses in education. Schools started to use them regularly as the biggest downside of computers was now gone, and schools started to see the potential of computers. In 1984, Drexel University was the first school to implement computers in its curriculum. This not only helped students in the future by giving them elaborate and deep lessons, but it also created a revolutionary public standard, and schools started to adapt to this change. Less than 10 years later, nearly 90% of US schools had access to computers. Computers would continue to evolve in education as the World Wide Web was introduced to the public on April 30th, 1993. The World Wide Web made it possible for computers to connect people with each other from across the world. Students can now use computers to access vast databases that they could not access before, and information with primary sources was a lot easier to access. The role of computers became even more vital as they would often hold most, if not all, the classroom material, since it was quicker to access and more efficient to utilize. Computers significantly contributed to the GPA increase of 0.3 on a 4.0 scale from 1995 to 2000, which portrays the effectiveness of computers in education. Computers have entirely flipped the classroom onto a better, revolutionary platform. The implementation of computers in classrooms has helped all students, and without them, society would be stuck in a worse state than today. Computers today help billions of children worldwide. Computers, a young creation, have managed to become one of the most important tools for learning in history.
Operations have declared such jubilations. Comstock has brought a son and daughter to Mr. and Mrs. Mickey Mouse. Pluto's giving the party, and before the fun begins, he presents the Gorgonzola to the father of the twins. Mr. Preacher's eyes are glistening, and he's fixing up a christening. Comstock has brought a son and daughter to Mr. and Mrs. Mickey Mouse. There's a crowd around the house of Mr. Mickey Mouse. Their cheering splits the air. Now let's see who is there. I'm Percy Pig the postman, and I bring the telegram.
I'm Charlotte Sheep, and I've come